We now listen to the reading, Rays of the One Light. Truth invites, it never commands. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Free will is a basic principle of life. God never coerces. He invites us to live in such a way that we find fulfillment in ourselves. If we refuse to live rightly, Paramahansa Yogananda taught, God simply says, I will wait. We have eternity to live. In that eternity, we live as we choose, in self-created darkness, a darkness as intense, as long-lasting as we choose, or in the infinite light, the true self, which is God. Jesus Christ in the Beatitudes offered a beautiful example of God's way of inviting mankind to seek perfection, not by commanding, but by offering his human children the incentive they need to choose the right of their own volition. Blessed are the poor in spirit, Jesus said, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. In each of the Beatitudes, Jesus explains the blessing attendant upon observing it. The divine way, similarly, for each of us is not to do violence to our own natures. Spirituality must be attained naturally. It can never be attained by force. The Bhagavad Gita says in the 3rd chapter, even the wise behave in accordance with nature as it is manifested in them. Of what avail then is suppression? The scripture then goes on, however, to explain that this doesn't mean we should surrender to the dictates of our lower nature. Rather, it emphasizes our need to aspire to the heights, but each of us in accordance with his own nature and not in imitation of anyone else's. Offering ourselves up for purification by divine grace. Desire, whatever form it takes, so the Bhagavad Gita explains, should be resisted, even if only mentally. Attachment and repulsion to sense objects, both of these are universally rooted. No one should accept their influence, for verily they are man's enemies. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. I know the story of a disciple of Yogananda, and he was very inspired by the desire of his guru when he was little to go into the Himalayan heights and withdraw. He had a very romantic view of living in a cave. And when Yogananda was more adventurous, he said these yogis, they create a lot of magnetism in this solitude of hours and hours of meditation. And then at a certain point, even the tigers, when they see these yogis in the Himalaya, they become calm and like cats. So he forgot that this desire of his guru was referring to when he was little, and that his same guru recommended to 99% of his disciples to live in the world, not in the Himalayas, and to search opportunities in the world, to serve, to meditate together with other people who maybe share the same discipleship and ideals. But this was something that he didn't want to know. He was just blind. He just kept the start of Master in his head. And so he had a little money and decides, now we're talking about the present times, so he decides to go to the Himalaya to spend a few months there near Rishikesh, the ancient town of the rishis, and he walks up in the mountains. He pays someone to bring him every day something to eat, and he starts his great seclusion. The guru sees his disciple, that his disciple was not obedient. He didn't follow his advice, so to say, to live in society, to learn and serve somehow in society. But the gurus are our friends. They are no dictators, so they don't say, you don't do what I say, so I'll just walk away. No. He says, okay, you didn't do what I asked you to do. Let's see if I can help you while you do what I told you not to do. Because he is always a friend. And sometimes we forget this because we are not always friend of our guru. We think maybe it's we prefer to live with a sense of guilt, not all of us, of course. So he walks to his cave without his disciple noticing it, and he gives his disciple 2 spiritual powers that can help him in his seclusion. And so the seclusion starts. Another disciple of Yogananda, Swami Kriyananda, at a certain point meditated 13 hours even a day. So this disciple sits there in the cave, starts meditating, and in his memories, in his subconscious mind, a lot of memories come up, and many memories also not so nice. This person did not treat me well, so I really I want this person to apologize with me. That other person betrayed me. Oh, what a beautiful holiday when we were young and free, and we were exploring, going out to eat and drink, and maybe looking for a girl. How wonderful was this? And so on. He kept on in his memories during his meditation. He also had learned that Swami Kriyananda sometimes during his seclusion in the Himalayas sometimes went for long walks. So also this disciple went for long walks. But during those walks, many desires of fame came up. I want to become famous. He liked to draw, so he thought, oh, I want to make this drawing. And while he was walking, he would imagine his drawings in the gallery or in the Louvre in Paris or in Florence in the Uffizi. So he would imagine himself as a famous artist traveling the world. So these were his thoughts while he was walking in this fantastic seclusion. But let's say it wasn't as bad as he thought, because somehow he manages to keep sitting. Okay, Swami Kriyananda meditated maybe 13 hours, so he succeeds 8 hours a day to sit in meditation. Yes, it's true, the food that was brought could have been better, and sometimes maybe he thought, I want Indian cuisine, why did they bring American food to me? But okay, despite everything, he just keeps sitting in meditation for 8 hours. It's not bad, right? And also something else, somehow all these let's say lamenting of his subconscious mind, he doesn't really give it a lot of attention. He doesn't make a big problem. He just says, okay, they're there in my mind, but I'm in my cave in the Himalayas and I am meditating. So somehow he accepts these thoughts, these things, without without feeling guilty. So he's very happy in the cave, and while he so the contrast was big, because he sits in the cave thinking of old vacations with his friends, but somehow anyway he manages to keep on sitting and practicing the techniques that Yogananda taught, Hong Sau, energization exercises, the art and science of Kriya Yoga, so that he would do. And we can say maybe he was a bit divided in two between his thoughts and what he was doing in this ascetic cave. He thought he had to go in this cave and practice Kriya Yoga. After a month, Yogananda thinks maybe this disciple needs a little more help, and he sends Anandamoyi Ma to him. She's a great saint, and Yogananda describes her story in a chapter in the autobiography of a yogi, where he calls her the love impermeated mother. And Anandamoyi Ma says, okay, if he needs help, then I'll go there. And she goes to this disciple and whispers in his ear, better to be in the world wanting to be in an ashram than be in an ashram wanting to be in the world. And this thought arrives somehow to this disciple, and so he says, okay, maybe I did my best, I did what I could, but maybe it was wrong. But now he wants not to go back to the world, but during that month, the cave had become his ashram. So he says, where do I go now? I'm Kriyaban, I practiced Kriya Yoga for a month, almost without interruption. I energized, I prayed, I did everything. What do I do now? I don't want to go into the world now and wanting to be in the cave, because then the story never finishes, like a yo-yo. When I'm in the world, I want to be in the cave. When I'm in the cave, I want to be in the world. So Yogananda again the disciple still in the cave. And Yogananda whispers in his consciousness, try Ananda, try Ananda. And so this disciple says, okay, I'll try. And he goes to the internet and finds Ananda. And the beautiful thing that the founder of Ananda, his brother and co-disciple, created a wonderful place that is not the world and it's not the ashram, but it's a place where people can live together, meditating daily together like our friend in the cave did, and also something more. They also need to live together, and this is not something easy. I would like you to raise your hand if it's always easy for you to live with others. I don't think you would raise your hand. Anyone would raise his hand here. But at Ananda, the principles are sadhana, the spiritual practices, service in cooperation with others. So to serve together and this disciple, this friend of ours, understands that this place was an ideal way to combine these two aspects that he had lived during the months in the Himalaya, which is the capacity to practice Kriya Yoga, and also all these we can call them karmic dynamics that were still working in his subconscious, to work with them, because being in a family, not necessarily in a community, but in the great family of Ananda Sangha, may it be a meditation group or individual, but remaining in contact with the spiritual family, in the cooperation with others, it is possible that harmony with others becomes something essential. And in order to create that, you need to work on yourself. In order to create harmony with others, you need to learn how to listen to others, not only to yourself. You need to learn how not to talk when it's not necessary, and to get in tune with the masters during the practice of daily life, during your service. So this was a unifying way, our friend thought, to live near to the world, in the world, near the world, without going into the direction of the world, where there's, especially now in this moment, the situation not very easy. So now I want to reveal to you these two powers that Yogananda gave to our friend at the beginning of our story. These were Tapasya of Meditation. Tapasya is a yogic principle that every yogi from the beginning of his spiritual path should practice. It is often translated as austerity, and in the spirituality of the New Age, let's say, this austerity doesn't mean to beat you up and to maybe not sleep, not eat, and do a lot, or to throw away all your money and give away everything you have. Tapasya means something more interiorized. Meditation is tapasya. Why? Because let's remember, our friend was sitting down, a lot of things happened. Distractions from outside were not there anymore. In that cave there was no baby crying, there were no dogs barking, there were no other people. He was all by himself in the cave in the Himalayas. So there were no exterior distraction, but interior distractions, inner distractions. There were many, many. So what was his tapasya? To not get up, to remain seated. And that's a recommendation to all of us. When you start to meditate, in the beginning, no one will ask you to meditate for 8 hours. Maybe in the beginning, you are asked to just try to meditate for half an hour. And when you sit down, it's normal that a lot of thoughts come up. And one of the principles in such a moment is not to get up. Like we say to kids in class, we ask them to sit still. And you can also teach children how to sit still without moving. The other spiritual power that the Master gave to our friend was calm acceptance. So the distractions that came up from his subconscious mind, he would welcome them, and he did not try to repress them and push them away. He said, oh, okay, apparently I still have this desire. Apparently I still want to do these things. And our friend didn't try to repress or push these desires away. He just accepted that they were there and then concentrated again on his practices with faith and perseverance. And then, sooner or later, these desires would have been transformed through his yoga practice. There's another aspect. Of course, it's a story that I invented myself. Don't try to look it up anywhere. It doesn't exist. But another aspect of this story, of this interesting, is that it brings us back to the story of Yogananda, when he, after only 6 months with his guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar in Sirampore, he asked him for permission to go away, to go to the Himalaya, to search for God alone. And his master, Sri Yukteswar, he just says, maybe wisdom, illumination you will find with your master, not somewhere in the Himalayas. And Yogananda, instead of taking the advice from his guru, repeats his answer, and then Sri Yukteswar doesn't answer, so Yogananda thinks, okay, who doesn't answer agrees, and he goes off to the Himalaya. But this shows us how a true guru never imposes himself. The truth in life is never imposed, and that is the title of today's lecture. For me too, it was always like that. I I'm very enthusiastic about this path and about these teachings, and they have always motivated me and gave me joy also in difficult moments. In reality, it started even before. I have 2 sisters, both older than me, and the older one, as a kid, I wasn't really interested in a relationship, and at one point we were in a holiday. We were at an island of one of the Dutch islands on the beach, and we had been with our family during the morning on the beach, and then for lunch we would go home to eat together. And my sister says, let's walk together. So the others would go by car, and my sister and I would walk on the beach for 4 kilometers and then would go towards our house. And for the first time, someone would talk to me with real interest about my spiritual seeking, but without imposing anything on me, just trying to make me reflect. She was asking me questions, and for me that was a key moment of my life. I think I was 9 or 10 years old, and I remember at the end of this walk with my sister, before we would join the family, we sat down on the beach, and she said, let's always try to remember this conversation that we had together. And this really touched my heart more than any other advice that I had been given until then from other adults, from my parents or others. And so this advice always remained in my heart. When I came in contact with these masters for the first time, masters of self-realization, the first time was when I saw the photo of Paramahansa Yogananda. It's the one on the first edition or editions of Autobiography of a Yogi. And something within me knew this is my guru. It was not very conscious, but I just knew. And when I started reading the Autobiography of a Yogi, many things were difficult to digest, to understand, to assimilate. I was a student, a university student, and a friend gave me 10 audio tapes. I was living in a small room in the center of Amsterdam, and I listened to these tapes, and it was Swami Kriyananda talking about his guru. And somehow this combination of the book Autobiography of a Yogi, which was a relationship between the book and me, it's still a companion, this book. I just open a page even today and I receive a lot of guidance and nourishment for my soul. But in that moment, when I listened to Swami Kriyananda's voice, there were all the speeches from maybe the 1970s. You could even hear the birds on these tapes. And I felt Yogananda's eyes watching me through the voice of Kriyananda, and they have never left me since then. Another thing that gives me a lot of enthusiasm is I started studying his Raja Yoga lessons, and the dedication said, I offer these lessons at the feet of my Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda. And I reflected why these words gave me so much joy. And I understood that Swami Kriyananda didn't want to protect his ego or keep these teachings. He wanted to give them back to the most important person in his life and to the supreme root of his own joy and enlightenment, his guru, Paramahansa Yogananda. And this meant to me, and it was confirmed to me when I met Swami Kriyananda, that when there is no ego, there are no limitations, and you can have a great master. When you have a master who connects his heart with the infinite, then through that door of the heart, the love pours out, and it doesn't end until your own consciousness is not expanded until the infinite. So later in my life, when I then met Swami Kriyananda in 1985, I noticed a very strong magnetism that talked to me. And it didn't impose anything on me, but it was very strong. He didn't want anything from me, but the thought that he implanted in my heart without words were, you come to Ananda because this is your Dharma. And I didn't understand it immediately. Maybe I was also a bit afraid. I wanted to finish my studies. I was living in the world. But still I made these feelings my own, because I always stayed in contact with Ananda, even when I was in the Netherlands. Then when I moved to Italy, I met other disciples in Rome, Ananda Rome, and somehow this contact, heart contact with Swami, always remained. Sometimes I could really feel his will. When he wanted to say something to another person, Swami didn't say it because he was very patient. He could even wait for years to say something, but he would direct a thought through his spiritual eye to the higher self of that person. And I could feel that, and sometimes I wasn't very comfortable with that, because it's not easy when someone talks to your higher self and you are not ready to live those advices yet. So to recap, the way to not repress yourself, but to live the spiritual way naturally, is calm acceptance. So anything that comes from your subconscious mind, don't repress it. Just do your techniques, practice Kriya Yoga, try to offer everything that you are up, and don't self-define yourself. For example, when you have a depressed thought, never say, I'm depressed, but say, there is a depressed thought within me, and with Kriya, I try to offer this up now. The other thing, important thing, so first, calm acceptance. That's a very powerful weapon in the psychological battlefield to be used. When you realize that you are self-accusing yourself because you're not perfect yet, then you're losing that calmness. Recall the calm acceptance and do everything with that. Another important thing is that truth always talks more through magnetism than through words. That was the case with Swami Kriyananda, who naturally talked a lot through his magnetism. He also talked, of course, a lot in his lectures. It's part of our mission. We talk, we share these teachings, but the true strength of Swami Kriyananda was his joy, his magnetism, his strength behind his being, and this strength could be felt through his determination to dedicate his life to sharing his Guru's teachings. 73 years ago today, when he entered at age 22 in this room in a church of self-realization in Los Angeles, in a certain sense he was taking all of us with him, because his desires were two, not one. It was not, he didn't go to his guru to only find God, but also to share God with others. And Yogananda satisfied both of his wishes. And it's important, and we will now finish with a whisper from eternity. It's important to remember, especially in these times where there is a lot of polarization, that you watch your reactive process. Yogananda says you don't always need to react. When someone writes something or says something, you don't need to react. Maybe 90% of the times you can also just say nothing and trust that when you search the truth within you, then that magnetism is the only good that you can contribute to the situation that we have now. So I will now read small whispers from eternity.
Let all rest in the shade of my peace. The breeze of thy love wafts through me, O Father. Leaves on my tree of life tremble gently in response to thy coming. My soul blossoms have begun to awaken. The rustling murmur of my thought leaves, whispering in the ether, calls to all matter-weary beings to come rest in the shade of my peace received from thee. Jai Guru.